Strong bat. This is the instructional video that I promised you I'd attempt to make. Now, to improve your overall shooting accuracy and ability, we're going to discuss the four basic fundamentals or four basic principles of accurate shooting. They begin with grip, stance, trigger control, and sight alignment. Now, to begin first with the least important, which is the stance. Now, the most common popular shooting stance used in competitive shooting is the Isosceles Stance. Now, stances are generally considered something that are preferential. Some shooters prefer one type of shooting stance or another. In the end, as long as you're providing some form of a stable shooting platform, the stance is largely irrelevant. Now, the isosceles is formed when the shooter is square to the target. He places his feet shoulder width apart. He bends slightly at the waist, aggressively extending his arms forward, rolling the shoulders slightly forward so that he is indexed onto the target. The hands are centered underneath the dominant or shooting eye, and the shooter's knees are bent slightly. Now, a bit on safety. Firearm is unloaded, there's no magazine in it. We have an empty chamber, and we're going to double check that again. Trigger down. Isosceles stance. Now, grip is a little more important to accurate shooting. Now, the most common form of grip that's used now, one that's most popular, is called the thumbs forward. Now, the shooter has his hand around the grip of the firearm. When he does this, the thumb of the shooting hand is pointing forward, but this leaves a gap right here on the grip. The non-shooting hand is pressed into that gap, wrapped around the fingers, and then that thumb is also forward. They're not crossed over in any way, but the non-shooting hand's thumb is pressed forward, and then that non-shooting hand's wrist is cocked slightly forward, extended. Now, there's a press together and a squeeze to hold that firearm stable into this grip that you've now attempted to maintain. Grip, thumb forward, palm into the area, wrapped around, thumb forward, and then the squeeze. Okay. We talked a little bit about managing recoil when it came to the wrists or stiffening the muscles in the wrists. If you were to take your hand, basically create that kind of holding position where you imagine the firearm in there, and were to press down, the muscles you would resist that pressing down with along the top of the wrist and inside the wrist are right there, are what you feel tightening up. Same thing would be true if you come underneath and press up and attempt to resist it. You'll feel the muscles in the wrist stiffen up. To create that stable platform, you tighten up those wrists so that the grip becomes solid. Now, sight alignment. Clearly, you have to have the sights aligned on the target. The sights are used as a barometer as to what direction the barrel is actually pointed. The bullet is going to go in the direction that the barrel is directed. Now, the front sight to the front of the gun, the notch of the rear sight generally give you this V and one finger presentation. You attempt to do is to place that the front sight is centered between the rear sight, and the top of the front sight is neither high or low or even with the top of the rear sight. Your focus is on the front sight. Target should be blurry behind. The front sights, which are closer, will be slightly out of focus. Now, during the firing proposition, when you are squeezing that trigger, you may notice a small wobble onto the front sight. This is unimportant in that as long as you keep that front sight between the rear sight and generally up and down, the bullet is going to land behind your front sight. Now, finally, trigger control and manipulation. The most important thing to shooting accuracy is a proper trigger manipulation. Now, if you have maintained a proper stance, if you've got a proper grip on the firearm, if you are taking a proper sight picture, and then you jerk violently on that trigger, pulling the sights off target, none of the rest of what you did is going to matter whatsoever. You're going to miss what you're shooting at. The most common mistake shooters make is to not develop a proper trigger control. They end up violently jerking on the trigger, pulling the sights off target, and not hitting what they're attempting to hit. So the trigger control is done as follows. You'll take the distal pad of the forefinger of the shooting hand, and you place that in the center of that onto the trigger. The pressure is applied directly back along the firearm so that it neither causes the front sight to go up, down, left, or right, or any variation of that. Once the shot breaks, you will maintain pressure on that trigger until the firearm goes through the cycling process. Slowly release that trigger forward until you hear the audible click. You'll actually feel it in the firearm. That is when the trigger resets and you're ready to shoot again. This shortens the travel of the trigger, making follow-up shots both faster and more accurate. Now, we've taken a proper grip. We have our isosceles stance. We've lined up our sights. We placed that trigger finger in there. We don't extend it past to the joint. We don't have the tip of the fingernail, the center of the distal pad. We squeeze straight back until the shot breaks. The gun cycles. We slowly release forward until we hear and feel the audible click. Once that's done, we immediately begin the rearward pressure on the trigger until the shot breaks again. If the shot surprises you, you have properly controlled your trigger and you'll have an accurate shot. Now, how do all of this play into managing recoil? Now, as we discussed, if I weigh 240 pounds, my gun weighs 2.5 pounds, I will win that push fight all day long. I can pick this firearm up, throw it against the wall because it weighs significantly less than me. But when the shot fires, it experiences something in the realm of 400 to 500 foot-pounds of pressure as the energy was released from the gunpowder. Most men are simply not strong enough to control that kind of energy. We can certainly direct some of it down through our bodies into the ground. It'll be taken up in the weight of the slide, pressure against the spring and whatnot, but the firearm is simply going to recoil some. But that recoil is irrelevant because we can't shoot during that time anyways. During that recoiling process, the slide comes back, the gun is out of battery, it ejects the spent casing out, and then it slides back forward until it picks up a new cartridge and places it into the chamber ready to shoot. During that same process, the front of the gun is going to come up slightly from the recoil, and then it will come back down into battery in the proper place. If we create this stable shooting platform, when that rocks up and comes back down, it immediately should return that front sight directly in front of our eyes, and we will be ready for the second shot. The problems that occur is when we try to fight that either too soon or too late. Now, as we also discussed in the email, with a round that's traveling nearly 1,000 feet per second, if we're shooting at a target 15 feet away, that round is going to be out the barrel into the ground in approximately 15 thousandths of a second. We, as humans, are not fast enough to recognize that that is taking place. We cannot control that process. What happens is we either make the mistake of trying to press too soon, driving the shot into the ground, or during the process we see it come up and then we force the gun back down, and again we've just created more problems for ourselves by pushing the sight down. Then we have to pull it back up. We generally pull up too far, then we have to settle this too fast, too far, we have to settle the sight back into the rear notch. If instead we try to create the stable platform to which the firearm is going to return each time, the managing recoil and the second shots are done faster. Bang, it comes right back to place. Bang, comes right back to place. Bang, comes right back to place.